They say that some doors don't just open, they pull you into a moment you never saw coming, and by the time you realize what's happening, your life has already tilted on its axis. For me, that door was a splintering sound I'll never forget. The sharp, jarring crack of wood giving way would reverberate through the hushed corridors of that modest house, a sound that arrived only a heartbeat before the entire course of my existence shifted into something I could never have predicted. Even now, years later, I can close my eyes and summon that exact noise, that violent snap of timber under strain, as though it were permanently etched into the very fabric of my memory. It was the kind of sound that doesn't just alert your ears, it alarms your entire body, sending a jolt of adrenaline racing through your veins before your brain has even had time to process what your senses are telling you. And in the aftermath of that terrible, resonant crack, everything changed, not dramatically, not with fireworks or fanfare, but quietly, like the turning of a page in a book you thought you'd already finished reading. I can still picture with startling clarity the way that golden, lazy afternoon sunshine poured itself through the grimy, dust-speckled windowpanes of that upstairs bedroom. The light fell in thick, buttery shafts across the worn floorboards, illuminating countless particles of dust that danced and swirled in the warm air like tiny, forgotten stars. I stood there, frozen in the middle of that room, the private, intimate sanctuary of my best friend's mother, staring down at the handmade bed frame that had consumed 3 entire days of my life. 3 exhausting, sweat-drenched, splinter-filled days during which I had measured, cut, sanded, and assembled every single piece of that structure with my own 2 calloused hands. It wasn't just a piece of furniture, it was a testament to patience, to care, to the quiet determination that drives a craftsman to see a project through to its absolute completion. And now, in one catastrophic instant, it lay broken before me. What had begun as nothing more than a straightforward, uncomplicated favor for an old family acquaintance would soon blossom into one of the most profoundly unforgettable chapters of my entire existence, a chapter that would ultimately teach me truths about human connection that no amount of formal education could ever have imparted. This experience, unfolding in ways I never anticipated, would reveal to me that kindness, grief, and the unexpected gift of second chances rarely announce themselves with trumpets and ceremony. Instead, they creep into our lives through back doors and half-open windows, arriving precisely when we least expect them, carrying lessons we didn't know we desperately needed to learn. Before we venture any further into this story, I want to pause and offer a small but heartfelt request. If you genuinely believe that kindness deserves not just a fleeting moment of acknowledgement but a genuine second chance, if you hold fast to the conviction that even the tiniest, most seemingly insignificant acts of compassion have the power to redirect the course of human lives, then please, take a single moment from your day to engage with this content. Click the like button, leave a thoughtful comment below, share this narrative with someone who might need to hear it, and consider subscribing to this channel, where we celebrate the quiet echoes of goodness that ripple through our world every single day. And while you're here, why not tell us exactly where you're watching from, what corner of this vast, interconnected planet has brought you to this story at this particular moment? Because narratives like this one exist to remind us that compassion, far from being a relic of a bygone era, continues to pulse and breathe and thrive in the hearts of ordinary people all around us. My name is Rowan Mercer, and at 27 years of age, I spent the overwhelming majority of my waking hours laboring in my father's modest carpentry workshop, a dusty, sawdust-scented haven nestled in a tranquil little town that seemed to be perpetually tucked between the gentle, rolling swells of green hills and the ceaseless, humming expanse of highways that stretched toward distant horizons. It was a quiet life, predictable in its rhythms, comfortable in its routines, and utterly unremarkable in the eyes of anyone who didn't know the smell of fresh-cut oak or the satisfying weight of a well-balanced hammer in one's palm. I had known my dearest friend Nolan since we were barely old enough to tie our own shoelaces. Our childhoods had been interwoven like the threads of a sturdy rope, bound together by countless shared adventures and misadventures that shaped who we would eventually become. We had spent our formative years racing bicycles down the same cracked, sun-baked pavements, our laughter trailing behind us like invisible ribbons. We had skipped classes together with the reckless abandon of youth, convinced that the world would always be forgiving of our minor rebellions. And we had spent endless hours sprawled across grassy fields, dreaming aloud about futures that always seemed impossibly distant, futures filled with grand accomplishments and daring escapades that bore little resemblance to the lives we would eventually inhabit. But as time has a habit of doing, it changed us both in ways we couldn't have foreseen. Nolan eventually packed his belongings into cardboard boxes and moved across the vast continental expanse for work, chasing opportunities that his hometown could never offer. Meanwhile, I remained anchored to our roots, helping my aging father keep the family business afloat after his health began its slow, inexorable decline, watching the man who had taught me everything I knew about wood and patience and pride gradually diminish before my eyes. It was only a few short weeks before that fateful, splintering afternoon that Nolan had called me out of the blue, his voice carrying an unfamiliar weight, a heaviness that suggested burdens he rarely allowed himself to articulate aloud. His mother, Marissa Hale, a woman who had always treated me as though I were one of her own, had recently made the difficult decision to sell the family home and downsize to a smaller, more manageable residence after spending years navigating the silent vastness of living alone. Since Nolan's professional obligations prevented him from returning home immediately to assist with the transition, he asked whether I could step into his shoes for a while. Specifically, he wondered if I might help his mother assemble the new furniture she had purchased and address a handful of minor repairs around the property, small tasks that would make her move significantly less overwhelming. I agreed without a single moment of hesitation, because some requests don't require deliberation. Marissa had been a fixture of kindness throughout my childhood, always ready with freshly made sandwiches and cold glasses of lemonade after we had spent long, exhausting afternoons tearing through the neighborhood on our bicycles. Her home had been a sanctuary for me, a place where I always felt welcomed and valued, and the thought of repaying even a fraction of that generosity filled me with quiet purpose. The very first time I crossed the threshold of her new residence, I was struck by a strange, almost palpable emptiness that seemed to permeate every corner of the space. The afternoon sunlight poured through generously proportioned windows, illuminating towers of cardboard boxes that stood stacked against walls still bearing the faint, clean scent of fresh paint. Marissa welcomed me at the door with a warm, familiar smile that radiated genuine affection, yet somehow, despite her best efforts, she couldn't quite conceal the deep, lingering sadness that dwelled behind her eyes. The loss of her husband years earlier had carved a silence into her existence that no amount of passing time had been able to fully erase. Grief, I would come to understand, is not a wound that heals completely, it simply becomes a part of you, a scar that you learn to carry with grace. She guided me through the house with gentle pride, showing me the guest room first, then the kitchen with its gleaming new appliances, and finally her bedroom, where the scattered pieces of an incomplete bed frame leaned forlornly against the wall, abandoned and neglected. The store had delivered the entirely wrong components, leaving her frustrated, disappointed, and facing yet another obstacle in a journey already filled with too many hurdles. As I examined the cheap, flimsy material that the retailer had sent, I found myself shaking my head in quiet disbelief. The wood was soft, the joints were poorly designed, and the entire structure would likely collapse within months of regular use. Without overthinking the decision, I offered to build something stronger myself, something that would not only function but would endure, just as she had endured. What followed was a stretch of days that began before the sun had even bothered to crest the horizon. My morning started in the hushed stillness of my father's workshop, surrounded by the familiar sense of sawdust and varnish and the comforting hum of machinery awakening to life. I measured each piece of oak with obsessive precision, carefully sanding every single surface until it was silk smooth beneath my fingertips, and tightened every joint with the kind of meticulous attention that only a true craftsman can appreciate. But somewhere along the way, somewhere between the careful measurements and the steady rhythm of my hammer, the project stopped being merely about building furniture. It had become something deeply personal, a mission that transcended the boundaries of a simple favor. I wanted to create something lasting, something that would serve as a tangible reminder that Marissa was not alone, that she still had people in her corner who cared about her well-being. Each afternoon, I would pack my tools into the back of my truck and drive the familiar route to her house, where I would work while she unpacked old photographs and arranged precious mementos on shelves that were gradually beginning to feel like a home once again. Sometimes, the two of us would talk for hours on end, our conversations meandering through topics both profound and trivial. She shared stories about Nolan's childhood, tales of his misadventures and triumphs, that I had never heard before, adding new dimensions to my understanding of my oldest friend. Other times, comfortable silence would fill the room between us, punctuated only by the gentle hum of the ceiling fan overhead and the rhythmic sounds of my tools working their magic on the wood beneath my hands. As those days stretched into one another, I began to notice just how profound Marissa's loneliness truly was. Friends visited less frequently than they had promised they would, their good intentions gradually eroded by the relentless demands of their own busy lives. Family members called occasionally, their voices tinny and distant through telephone lines, but rarely made the effort to visit in person. She carried herself with an admirable strength, a resilience that had been forged through years of navigating life's most difficult challenges, yet there were moments, fleeting, almost imperceptible moments, when her carefully constructed composure would crack, and her expression would betray the immense weight she had been carrying for so many solitary years. It was in those moments that I understood, perhaps for the first time, that strength and vulnerability are not opposites but companions, and that true courage often lies in allowing others to see your pain. On the fourth afternoon of my labor, I finally completed the bed frame. It stood before me in all its sturdy, oak-scented glory, polished to a warm, inviting sheen, built with the kind of robust construction that would easily outlast the next several decades. I stepped backward, wiping the perspiration from my forehead with the back of my sleeve, and allowed myself a quiet, private moment of pride. The frame was solid, dependable, and beautiful in its simplicity, exactly what I had envisioned from the very beginning. Marissa appeared in the doorway, her presence announced by the soft creak of the floorboards beneath her feet, and she simply stared at the finished piece with tears beginning to gather at the corners of her eyes, tears that threatened to spill down her cheeks at any moment. Then, releasing a small, self-deprecating laugh intended to deflect attention from her emotions, she looked directly at me and made a suggestion that caught me completely off guard. She remarked, with a hint of playful mischief in her voice, that perhaps the bed needed to be properly tested, and asked whether I would be willing to assist her in that evaluation. At first, I laughed awkwardly, uncertain of what she was implying, my cheeks flushing with the heat of mild embarrassment. But when she lowered herself carefully onto the mattress and pressed her palm firmly against the wooden frame, applying gentle but insistent pressure, I suddenly understood her true intent. She wasn't making an inappropriate joke or testing boundaries. She simply needed reassurance, a tangible, physical confirmation that something in her life had finally become dependable again, that this one small piece of her new world could be trusted not to collapse beneath her. I settled onto the opposite side of the mattress, and together, in perfect silence, we listened. The frame remained absolutely, perfectly still beneath our combined weight. No ominous creaking, no shifting of joints, no groaning protest from the oak. Just silence, a profound, reassuring silence that spoke volumes without uttering a single word. For several long, suspended moments, neither of us broke that silence. We simply sat there, two people bound by circumstance and kindness, sharing a quiet understanding that transcended the need for conversation. Then Marissa admitted something that struck me with the force of a physical blow, leaving me momentarily breathless. She confessed that ever since she had relocated to this new house, she had dreaded the arrival of nighttime more than anything else. Every evening, when the darkness settled outside like a heavy blanket and the world grew still, the emptiness of her surroundings became utterly impossible to ignore. She missed the simple, ordinary sounds of another human being moving through the house, the soft padding of footsteps, the muffled sound of a television in another room, the distant clatter of dishes being washed in the kitchen sink. She missed laughter, conversation, and even the petty, inconsequential arguments that had once filled her ordinary days and made them feel full and alive. I found myself at a complete loss for words, my mind racing to find something, anything, that might offer comfort. But in that moment, I realized something crucial about human connection. There are times in life when people aren't searching for solutions, clever advice, or philosophical wisdom. They simply want someone to bear witness to their pain, to sit beside them in the darkness and acknowledge that their suffering is real and valid. So I stayed. I didn't offer empty platitudes or attempt to minimize her grief with cheerful reassurances. I simply remained present, a silent companion in her moment of vulnerability. That afternoon gradually melted into a long, golden evening as we shared cups of steaming coffee in her kitchen, watching the brilliant hues of sunset fade across the sprawling backyard. The light shifted from amber to rose to deep violet, and in the quiet glow of twilight, I came to a profound realization for the first time: grief does not disappear with the passage of time, no matter how many years accumulate between the loss and the present moment. It merely transforms, shifting its shape like clouds rearranging themselves across the sky. And sometimes, the slow, patient work of healing begins with something as beautifully simple as showing up, consistently, dependably, unthinkingly, when someone needs you most. Over the weeks and months that followed, helping Marissa gradually became an integral, cherished part of my weekly routine. I repaired cabinet doors that had come loose from their hinges, painted fences that had grown weather-beaten and tired, and fixed leaky faucets that dripped with maddening persistence. But the actual work itself ultimately mattered far less than the conversations that accompanied it, the easy, flowing dialogues that sprang up naturally between us as we labored side by side. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, genuine laughter returned to her home. The photographs that lined her shelf stopped feeling like mournful reminders of what she had lost and began transforming into celebratory tributes to a life that had been richly, fully lived. When Nolan eventually made the journey back home for a visit, he was visibly stunned by the transformation that had taken place in his absence. His mother appeared happier, lighter somehow, as though an invisible weight had been lifted from her shoulders. One tranquil evening, as we sat together on her porch watching neighborhood children chase each other through the gathering dusk, he thanked me in a voice thick with genuine emotion. He admitted, with a vulnerability that surprised me, that he had worried constantly about leaving her alone for such an extended period. The guilt had gnawed at him, a persistent undercurrent of anxiety beneath the surface of his daily life. I waved away his gratitude with a dismissive shrug, insisting that anyone in my position would have done exactly the same thing. But deep down, in the quiet recesses of my heart, I knew that wasn't entirely true. In a world that seems to move faster with each passing day, a world of endless notifications, relentless deadlines, and distractions at every turn, kindness has become something we frequently postpone. We promise to visit next weekend, call tomorrow morning, or offer our help when life becomes slightly less chaotic. Yet some of the most meaningful moments in human experience occur precisely because someone chooses to stop what they're doing and care, right now, in this moment, without waiting for a more convenient time. Months later, Marissa hosted an intimate gathering in her new home, filling the space with the warmth of company and conversation. Friends, neighbors, and family members crowded into the living room, their voices blending into a cheerful symphony of overlapping dialogue. Music drifted through the open windows, carried by a gentle breeze, while laughter echoed merrily down the hallway. At one point during the festivities, she pulled me aside with a mysterious smile and led me into her bedroom. The bed still stood exactly where we had constructed it, strong and unchanged, a silent monument to our shared labor. She ran her hand across the polished surface of the oak, tracing its grain with reverent fingers, and thanked me quietly, not for building furniture, but for helping her believe, against all odds, that life still held good things ahead. She had been trapped in the suffocating belief that her best days were behind her, that the future held only loneliness and decline. But I had unwittingly shown her otherwise. And in that profound moment, I finally understood something my father had spent years trying to teach me, a lesson that had always seemed abstract until now. Sometimes, we go through our days convinced that we are building tables, doors, shelves, and beds, when in reality, we are helping to rebuild the shattered pieces of someone's heart. Our hands may grip hammers and saws, but our purpose reaches far beyond the physical objects we create. We are architects of hope, masons of memory, carpenters of compassion. Before this story draws to its close, I want to extend a special request to everyone who has accompanied me on this journey. Please, take a moment to comment below with one act of kindness that someone has shown you, something you will never forget, no matter how much time passes. Your words may inspire another person reading this today, reminding them that goodness is not a relic of the past but a living, breathing force that continues to shape our world. As I drove home that night, beneath a sky painted in the fading, watercolor hues of sunset, I found myself reflecting on how unexpected journeys so often begin with the most ordinary of choices. A simple favor, offered without second thought, had blossomed into a friendship that neither of us could have anticipated, a friendship that reminded me, in the most powerful way possible, that compassion has a way of finding people exactly when they need it most. It doesn't announce itself with grand gestures or dramatic fanfare. It arrives quietly, through open doors and half-finished bed frames, through shared cups of coffee and unspoken understandings. And if this story has touched even a single corner of your heart, I would be deeply grateful if you would like, share, and subscribe to this channel where we celebrate the echoes of kindness that resonate through our lives. Leave a comment and let us know whether you believe that small, seemingly insignificant acts of compassion can truly change someone's life, because I have learned, through first-hand experience, that they absolutely can. Sometimes, the strongest, most enduring things we build are not made of wood at all, but from patience, understanding, and the quiet courage it takes to stand beside someone when they need you most.